and gentlemen, welcome to violence, the word and the act. While violence cloaks itself in a plethora of disguises, its favorite mantle still remains sex. Violence devours all it touches, its voracious appetite rarely fulfilled. Yet violence doesn't only destroy, it creates and molds as well. Let's examine closely then this dangerously evil creation, this new breed, encased and contained within the supple skin of woman. The softness is there, the unmistakable smell of female. The surface, shiny and silken. The body yielding yet wanton. But a word of caution, handle with care and don't drop your guard. This rapacious new breed prowls both alone and in packs, operating at any level, any time, anywhere, and with anybody. Who are they? One might be your secretary, your doctor's receptionist, or a dancer in a go-go club.
While living fast, and if you want to end up giving your all, let me call again is living reckless, but well, just you. She will let on you, and she'll take just what you want as she goes along. You belong to me, and she's living.
Go, baby, go! Go, 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 go! Go, work it on now, don't you say? Go there, go, baby, go! Oh, shake it. Come on, let's go! Go, baby! Well, let's go! Let's go! Hurry, let's go! Let's go now! Harder, faster!
In reading books, commentaries, and reviews on rape revenge movies, two schools of thought are often recurring narratives. The first is that these are disgusting, misogynistic fetishizations of sexual violence, and the second is often, why do I, as a survivor of rape, find this cathartic? There's a certain phenomenon that I feel like people who haven't experienced sexual assault, grief, or severe trauma don't always understand. And that's the experience of losing yourself. Trauma changes who you are and how you see yourself. And at least while you're trying to get through it, you don't see it as for the better in any way. Real life isn't like a movie. In the classic hero's journey, you have an ordeal, a transformation followed by reward or redemption. Every rock bottom has a climb back to the top, a triumph. But in the real world, most survivors of sexual assault have no such luck. For those who never see justice, the best that we can hope for is to grow around our trauma, and to mourn the loss of who we used to be. Not to move on, but to live with it. Is it not natural to seek out or create media depicting the catharsis of a reality you will never have? In 1611, when she was 17, the famed Baroque artist Artemisia Gentileschi was violently raped by her father's friend. Instead of this being treated like a crime committed against her, it was treated as if it were a theft against her father, that he robbed him of her purity. Already a convicted rapist of women in his own family, a deal was struck to save her honour by having him marry her. He reneged on this deal in order to humiliate her further. During the trial, Artemisia was tortured with thumbscrews to ensure that she wasn't lying.
And she's saying, yeah, è vero, è vero, è vero. It is true, it is true, it is true.
That's really hard. It's really hard to stomach.
Yeah.
Her rapist brought in a parade of witnesses that he'd paid, who claimed that she had posed nude for male artists and was a whore whose father sold her to men, and that she had sex with her own father. She had to graphically recount her own rape with her rapist in the room, which involved extreme violence against her and a failed attempt to defend herself with a knife, and the court subjected her to an examination of her hymen. We know all of these details because of the graphic 400-page testimony that she was forced to give.
Where Artemisia is telling about the rape. E gli sgraffignai il viso,
Okay.
e gli strappai i capelli.
So that is Artemisia saying that what she did to Agostino to try and stop him is she scratched his face, she pulled his hair.
After being forced to lay every detail of her assault, her body and her trauma bare in court, Artemisia finally won the case. At one point, her rapist's lies were so ridiculous that the judge had to stop him and tell him to stop lying. Her rapist, now a repeat offender, and during the trial was revealed to be planning to murder his wife, was imprisoned for a few years, but he was set free after only one. Little is known about how she felt about the whole ordeal outside of her testimony, but what we do see is her art. Artemisia offered an empowered depiction of rape trauma and rape revenge in some of her famous pieces. In the aftermath of her rape and trial, she painted one of her most well-known works of art, Judith slaying Holofernes, a dark and gruesome view of an assassination with powerful women taking graphic, brutal revenge on the leader of the army who invaded their country. Some art historians go so far as to call it a self-portrait, a biographer saying it had the feeling of an untamed scream. In my opinion, this is one of the first documented cases of autobiographical rape revenge art. This video is by far not the most comprehensive view or analysis of rape revenge films, and I don't intend for it to be. Originally this was just going to be more of an in-depth film analysis, but frankly I'm a layman and there's harm in spoiling films I want people to view. So instead of me just repeating film analysis, this is a personal view of rape revenge movies and what they have done for me, and I hope other survivors. Not a defence, but an attempt to show you what I experienced when I watched them, and an offer, an invitation for you to watch them through my eyes. In 1978, the film I Spit on Your Grave was released. Far from the first rape revenge movie, the cult following and graphic nature of the film pushed it further into the public eye than many. Roger Ebert himself tore the movie to shreds, even criticising a woman in the cinema who cheered on the heroine.
And essentially, the whole debate about the first film was whether or not it was just horrible, sleazy, and completely misogynist, or whether actually it was strangely empowering. And as you probably know, there's been a lot of debate since then. And Carol Clover, in her book Men, Women and Chainsaws, writes about it as a kind of one of the definitive final girl movies. And there's also a...
Was that a big seller?
It was, oddly enough, no, it was in the academia section of, you know, horror as seen. It was. I mean, it's actually a very important book. I know it sounds like a gag, but Men, Women and Chainsaws by Carol Jacob is actually a very, very important book.
In the academia world of horror. It's
yes, of which there is a surprisingly large amount. And there's also a very famous essay written in defence of it called J. Hills is Alive. And the whole sort of debate about it is, actually, is the film on the side of the woman, or is it actually just leery and awful and grindhousey and terrible?
Second wave feminism, being what it was at the time, largely tore the movie to shreds. They picketed it and said that it shouldn't be accessible for anybody to view, and that it fetishized sexual violence. Yet in recent years, many of these opinions have changed somewhat. Those second wave protesters, now stuck in a different kind of reactionary rage, have often backtracked and now welcomed the female rage at the heart of the movie. Despite what many viewers and critics thought at the time, the audience was only ever meant to relate to the character of Jennifer. Notorious transphobic pseudo-feminist Julie Bindel was one of those second-wave feminists picketing at showings of the movie, and she herself now acknowledges that the movie is a feminist film. It's ironic that all that hate inside you that you directed at other people turned out to be misplaced. Writer B.J. Colangelo has written a lot about her personal relation to the movie, and in a Fangoria interview she makes a remarkable point about defending this movie and how it should be accessible. The fact that the response to this movie was to shut it down, ban it, and pretend that it was unworthy of mention says a lot about our culture in the way that the most realistic portrayal of rape is the one that we have decided is the one that needs to go away. And on those terms alone, this movie is so important and in need of defending. In Rape Revenge Films: A Critical Study, which I will be quoting from a lot and is really good, Alexandra Heller Nicholas says, "To lock rape revenge in its entirety down to a reductive and commonly ideologically weaponized binary between feminist or not feminist fundamentally disrespects the diversity of responses these films provoke in people, including women. These responses are all valid in the sense that, as contradictory as they are, every person who watches a rape revenge film has a fundamental right to their own reaction." She writes about being approached by survivors and how the filmmakers have told her the same. Karen Lamb, the director of Doll Parts, and Evangeline said that she had incredible feedback from women's shelters and rape crisis centres who showed them to some of their members. Jim Hemphill said that one of the biggest and most pleasant surprises to the reaction of his film Bad Reputation was that its biggest fans tended to be rape survivors. He had women contacting him and telling him that they loved the movie and that it made them feel safe. If rape revenge films are anti-feminist, do I, as both a survivor and a so-called feminist, just not count? Am I anti-feminist because I like them? For what it's worth, my perspective on the film I Spit on Your Grave is this. For many survivors, it is one of the ultimate movies to watch after a rape. Criticised for its low-budget simplicity and focus on the horrors of rape, that's why I like it. When I watched it after my rape, I felt seen. And I feel seen when I watch many rape revenge movies. What happened to me that people told me wasn't that bad, and I was getting worked up over nothing, is being shown as the traumatic ordeal that it is. One thing I couldn't help but identify with when watching these movies was the sense of, what do I do afterwards? Rape in movies is often depicted as a violating act, a fade to black, somebody's overpowered, and then the scene ends. We don't see what happens immediately after the assault. After my own assault, I was locked in the person's house and had to leave with him the next morning, pretending that nothing had happened because I was scared that if he knew that I knew what he'd done, he'd hurt me physically. But what I see as a liberating experience of seeing my trauma depicted, other survivors often see as exploitative and offensive. And in reality, their opinion is as valid as mine. Having an emotional connection with movies often helps us overlook or be attracted to what other people would criticize. That specific movie aside, the whole genre of rape revenge is often criticized as exploitative. But what's missing from a lot of this framing is the fact that some rape revenge movies are made by rape survivors. And this isn't a new phenomenon. Often culturally seen as exploitative female avenger movies, this view of rape revenge movies as nothing more than video nasties continued to be a common mainstream opinion for a long time. The Me Too movement and more modern intersectional readings of older movies seems to have helped shift this a little bit. The recent rise in popular rape revenge movies being made by women is giving rise to actually seeing these films as legitimate pieces of art depicting trauma. Really, it just seems like an obvious reality that once filmmaking is more accessible to female filmmakers, you will undoubtedly see those filmmakers making the movies that they want to see. And in a world where 1 in 3 women globally have been subjected to sexual violence, some of those are going to be movies about their trauma and the fantasy of revenge. Survivors of sexual violence understand what drives the catharsis of rape revenge the most, because we're the ones who experience it the most. MFA director Natalie Later has talked about her personal connection to the movie. She herself was sexually assaulted while in art school.
I'm a good guy. I'm changed. Please.
Both directors of the movie Violation are survivors. Every woman involved in making Baise-Moi is a survivor of sexual violence. But one thing this narrative of rape revenge movies are feminist now, we flipped it.
I'm a nice guy.
Are you?
That's shown up in the aftermath of Me Too does, is ignore the importance of the women making the movies that everybody decried as anti-feminist. The actresses. In an interview following the movie Elle, Isabelle Huppert talks to the interviewer about the characterization of Elle. Starting work, as is her custom, she settled on a look for the character, did her research. But research, she says, is mostly just thinking. Then she was ready. It was almost like a documentary. He decided where to put the camera, then filmed whatever I did. Once he gave me the role, he said, do whatever you want, and whatever I did was good by definition. So she directed herself? No, the director pulls the strings, letting the actress do this. If you ask me who made Elle, I'll say we. And she's not alone in that. When rape revenge movies are criticised, it's rarely the actors' performances that are criticised. Who made Miss 45? Abel Ferreira, sure. But who made Miss 45, the striking and memorable movie we think of today? That would be Zoe Lund, in her performance where she only has one speaking line. I want to be clear that there are plenty of rape revenge movies I don't like, and some that I do think are men creating fetishizing, disturbing cinema. The movie thriller A Cruel Picture, or They Call Her One Eye, is a rare Swedish film better known for inspiring characters like Elle Driver and Tallulah Black than its actual substance. The movie itself is actually pretty great in places, with competent and often harrowing writing, pretty unique camera work, and a brilliant main character. But in most ways, the movie is completely ruined by the filmmakers trying to capitalise on lax pornography laws in Scandinavian countries by having many rape scenes be explicit, drawn out and treated erotically and filmed like pornography. When most people think of rape revenge movies as sexploitation, they're probably thinking of movies in a similar vein, where a rape scene is just an excuse for story to have legal porn depicting sexual violence. In the same vein, I think there are movies that are heavily treated like the feminist awakening of rape revenge that fail to deliver in many ways. I can't think of a better way to summarise it than the ending of the highly stylised Promising Young Woman. In a world where rapists, especially rich white male rapists, are rarely ever justly sentenced for their crimes, including the case that the title is a reference to, why, as a survivor, should I take Cassie's revenge from beyond the grave as successful, just because they were arrested? It's not over, and both she and her friend are dead. Is her sacrifice likely to end in actual vengeance? I do actually love media that handles failed revenge or revenge destroying the person seeking it. Just not painted as a victory the way that Promising Young Woman did, with such a satirical film saying as much as it did.
And statistically, feminists are more likely to do anal. It's a literal fact, by the way.
Really? I'm a nice guy.
Are you?
If you have a reputation for sleeping around, then maybe people aren't going to believe you when you say something's happened. I mean, it's crying wolf.
From the title to most of the dialogue, it felt jarring that it didn't use its ending to talk about the low conviction rates of sexual crimes, and just give us a happy ending that maybe they were put away for life on a single murder charge, that they could feasibly use their money or corrupt officials to claim self-defense on. Rape revenge movies live in the zeitgeist of when they were made, representing the anxieties and fears of people at the time. When now we see movies about acquaintance rape, date rape, and campus rape as representing our time, in the 70s a lot of films focused on urban fears, of paranoia in the big city, and the fear of unknown rural people. We could call Birth of a Nation an early rape revenge film that represented racist white America's fears of miscegenation. In the hugely influential book, From Reverence to Rape, The Treatment of Women in Movies, author Molly Haskell takes out a lot of anger on actor and director Ida Lupino, who directed a foundational early rape revenge movie called Outrage. For the crimes of what she perceived as playing a stronger female character in roles directed by men than ones she directed, catering to a sexist industry that she had to work in, not being enough of a women's lib advocate for her, and purring like a kitten in the presence of men, going so far as to call her movies sexist. I found this book recommended pretty much everywhere when I was looking into feminist film criticism, but I really hate it. No joke, every time I try to sit down and actually substantially read it, I read a passage that's so snide, so jaded and bigoted, I put it down. It reads like a sad, bitter woman who spends her life hating anyone who ever tried to do something below what she deemed moral, including being gay or Chinese.
The homosexual writer came halfway out of the closet, but disguised in women's clothes that bulged in the wrong places. Gays complained that they never had identification figures in the movies, that the only couples the screen provided were heterosexual. But the irony is that if they weren't homosexual couples, then they weren't exactly heterosexual either. Roger Greenspun, and if the women weren't ever perverse, they sure retribution by women's libbers, daily with pan-Greeks to sexploitation starlets with bodies, particularly breasts, developed in inverse ratio to their brains. There are a few good years in which he can both appreciate and operate, but not enough, particularly with the current defections from heterosexuality, to satisfy the female population, which may be why more and more women are turning to each other or to themselves. Chauvinistic lesbians merely adopt the imperialistic characteristics of male sexuality. It is one of the properties of perspective that from a distance of time or space, everyone, like the Chinese, at present, the industry, such as it is giving women the same treatment as it gave blacks for the half-century after birth of a nation. A kick in the face or a cold shoulder. And homosexual sensibilities merged to create the silicon seductresses of pulp film like Raquel Welch, non-women like Twiggy and Goldie Hawn, and the male and female drag goddesses of the Warhol Morrissey factory down the from Candy Darling could not be used in the same way. For with her, as with de Trike, there is no room for any other members of the female sex. Indeed, so complete is West's androgyny that one hardly knows into which sex she belongs. Such as it is giving women the same treatment as it gave blacks she is for the half-century after birth of a nation. Too masculine to be a female impersonator. Chauvinistic lesbians merely adopt the imperialistic characteristics of male sexuality. Female had identification figures in the movies. Tyler has discerned that are the only couples that provide both appreciate and operate, but not in the hypothetical, particularly with the characteristic one of the properties of perspective they were to heterosexual time or space. Maybe why more and more women like are turning to each other or to like the Chinese.
Even with the benefit of hindsight and a forward that acknowledges this, I just can't really do it. This book is second wave feminist film criticism at its worst to me. And I feel like to this day, the effects of the second wave radfems still has the lingering effect of vilifying the people involved in making rape revenge movies, including the women. The criticism that rape revenge movies are all misogynistic video nasties has done nothing but hurt the women involved in making them, and make movies less accessible to survivors. I posit that women and making rape revenge movies has always gone hand in hand, whether they're in front of the camera or behind it. It's only recently that people have chosen to listen, and for more movies with a more explicit focus on the inherent trauma of sexual violence to come to the forefront. They've always been there, but not often taken seriously outside of cult cinema. People often have a preconceived notion of what a rape victim should look like before and after the events, and popular movies influence and reinforce these views too. Ripped clothes, crying, screaming, fighting for your life. But most survivors don't show these signs. Many survivors don't even tell anybody what happened, or show signs of trauma that people don't expect.
I don't want these. I want my sheets.
After what happened on them, if I were you, I would never want to see those sheets again.
Well, you're not me!
It's not only people who will never experience sexual assault who have these preconceptions about what a rape is, what it looks like or does to you, it's survivors too. There's a book that is commonly passed around survivor forums called The Gift of Fear by Gavin De Becker. In it, he talks a lot about what is commonly known as the fight or flight reflex, a misnomer, as he calls it, because one of the most common reactions people in survival circumstances experience is freeze. What many survivors experience is fight, flight, freeze, or even two lesser talked about occurrences, flop or fawn. Many survivors have this notion in their head that if something ever happened to them, they'd fight, they'd scratch or kick their way out and bite and run to the hills. But these responses are also neurochemical impulses, as real as fight or flight.
I always thought if it happened to me, I'd fight back. But actually, I just froze. I thought I'd scream and shout, but I literally couldn't move. I hoped people would understand. They didn't.
In reality, none of us knows how we'd react to being raped. Our brain goes into survival mode and our instincts automatically take over. Freezing is a perfectly natural response to trauma. And you need to understand this, because one day someone might tell you they've been raped. Your friend, your neighbour, your daughter, your son, or a stranger. You could be on a jury in a rape trial, hearing someone say,
I thought I'd fight back. I just froze.
So many people, including those that it happens to, don't see it as such. It's seen as giving in or just taking it. So when a survivor freezes, submits, or blacks out, they see it as a personal failing because everybody else taught them that it was. They don't see it for what it really is, which is their brain doing the best it can in that situation to keep them alive. And the first places that I saw films that deliberately filmed and framed scenes of sexual assault, deliberately to show that how I was assaulted was a valid way of reacting, were rape revenge movies. It's hard to talk about the experience of seeing your trauma represented without talking about what that trauma is. So here's the part where I feel the need to tell my story. Just before Christmas of 2014, after having extreme nightmares of bizarre sexual abuse out of nowhere for months, I'd been staying at my best friend's house. I slept in his bed at his request because he said, "A guest sleeping on the floor makes me look like a bad host." I awoke to him using my body for his pleasure. My reaction was to freeze and pretend to be asleep and act like nothing was wrong, while I retreated inside my head, cried silently while facing the opposite direction, and just died inside. I was awake for hours. At one point, I eventually got the courage to fake waking up and go to the toilet. I tried to text people for help, only to get no answer because it was 1 AM. I realised I didn't know where the key was to his front door or what to do, and just retreated back to bed, hoping that he would stop now that I'd woken up once. He didn't. He just waited until I pretended to fall asleep again. During this time, I realised that this had happened several times, and I had woken up before to him doing this, and more in my sleep for months. But I had been so in denial that I had convinced myself that they were waking dreams. Over the course of the next few years, I lost pretty much every friend that knew both of us. If it wasn't that they didn't believe me, then it was that they didn't think it was a big deal, and I was overreacting, letting it ruin my life. A few years later, I received disturbing, anonymous calls in the middle of the night. They were someone breathing heavily and grunting down the phone, and I knew that it was him. I changed my number and tried to report it to the police, and was told that so much time had passed that they didn't really care. Some months later, in a fit of digital self-harm, I looked him up and found that days after those phone calls, he had got married and had 2 kids. Disturbed, I tried to send his wife the absolutely comprehensive list of evidence that I had, only for her to take one look at all of it, ask him if he did it, and call me a lying homewrecker who would have been asking for it anyway when he said, "Of course not." The closest representation I've ever seen to my own adult assault in cinema is the closely shot, tightly framed, blurry and confused rape scene of Violation. Like the protagonist, I was assaulted in my sleep by a trusted friend. And in watching it, the feeling of shock, confusion, quiet terror, and absolute stillness were finally represented. How this scene was shot was almost exactly how it felt. And I had never seen that before. And Violation and many other rape revenge films are the closest I've ever seen to how it felt to be treated after. There's an inherent sense of power that comes with seeing your lived experiences represented on the big screen, and I don't think that that sentiment is heavily debated in any other capacity. The act of showing rape in rape revenge films is probably the most criticised aspect about them, especially in modern discourse online, where the few bad pieces of media you've consumed in regards to this become your entire worldview and feed, assuming that because one piece of media you once consumed did it, all rape scenes and all films that show a rape are shock value misogynistic trash directed by men. Though this male gaze criticism is not often given to literature in the same way. In Rape Revenge Films, A Critical Study, rape revenge features centrally in Shakespeare's Titus Andronicus, adapted to screen as Titus in 1999. Despite the assumed lowbrow nature of rape revenge, literary adaptations are not rare. Despite the literary credentials of many of these authors, when adapted to the screen, the highbrow-lowbrow tension between literature and film has held steadfast. Lily Paquette's asserting that rape revenge narratives adapt to literature, whether fictional memoir, as more nuanced and less reliant on the corporeal female body, as readers can empathise with the victim through narration that offers her perspective rather than spectacle. Yet when moving to cinema, the deployment of rape, and of rape revenge, does not support the claim that in cinema, sexual violence is deployed for spectacle alone. Survivors of sexual trauma live a life where they are told how to feel and what to do, that what they went through wasn't that bad, or even that it should have affected them more.
Connor, do you know how many situations I have been in where grown-ups want something messed up from me that I don't want to give them, or they want me to say something that I don't want to say, or they want me to do something that I don't want to do? A lot. Like, a lot.
Out. So you know that nail polish, it changes color if there's a date rape drug in it? You put it on, you swirl it around, it'll change colors.
Oh yeah, I've tried that.
Right? We totally need that on campus.
I love
We should urge the school to provide it for incoming freshmen.
Or guys could just stop drugging and raping girls so we don't need color-changing nail polish.
That would be nice, but until that day comes, I think we need to be prepared.
What if we're not prepared? What if we have a drink? What if we wear high heels and we didn't learn Taekwondo? What if we forgot our rape whistle at home and we didn't paint our nails with color-changing nail polish that tells you if your drink is drugged? Then what? We just get raped?
Even the harshest critics of the rape revenge narrative should be able to see the value in survivors reclaiming the right to find power in a type of media that society, whether that be different types of feminism, film critics, online discourse, or family and friends, tell them is wrong.
I feel amazing.
And often it's not even other people telling you that you shouldn't be able to enjoy it, but your own guilt.
Why not?
June.
Why does healing have to be the only goal? Why can't we be as furious as we feel? Don't we have that right?
I feel categorizing rape revenge as a genre, or even a subgenre, isn't always true, and instead it's often a theme.
Your best friend is just some great guy, and I'm just this low-life whore that he raped right in front of you.
Rape revenge, I think, is undoubtedly a genre of its own, growing out of the video nasties and sexploitation movies into their own violent thing. But the theme of rape revenge lives and thrives with other genres too. Horrors and thrillers tend to be the most prominent genres within this theme, so discussion of it isn't limited to the horror genre, but does tend to revolve around it. We see the theme of rape, revenge, and justice in other explicit genres, however.
He pretended his dog was sick.
What's the dog's name?
Jack, there wasn't a dog. He was trying to trick me, okay? There wasn't a dog. Old Nick stole me.
I want a different story.
No, this is the story that you get.
From legal and crime dramas to explicit social commentaries and satires. And when I talk about rape revenge, it's not just limited to film. TV, comic books, and even music all carry the theme of rape revenge.
Does society have justice for you? Well, if not, I do. She was asleep night. She saw the deputy. She's gonna leave him at the store. Hey! 45.
Revenge as an all-encompassing theme isn't just about violence and murder. There's media exploring these themes where the vengeance is legal justice, social justice, organizational justice, or failed justice. The Virgin Spring and Last House on the Left, which was inspired by the Virgin Spring, are culturally iconic rape revenge movies where the victim isn't the person who gets revenge at all. There's films where the only difference between the movie and a rape revenge is that an explicit or successful rape never happens. Maybe a hot take, but maybe some rape justice movies are just rape revenge for people who don't like violence or people who have faith in the justice system. But for most, it doesn't work that way. Again, in Rape Revenge Films, A Critical Study, the author writes, at their most powerful, rape revenge films expose and collapse simplistic assumptions about the ethics of representing rape on screen, and remind us that what we see is only a brief glance through a small controlled window into the true horror of rape and sexual violence in terms of the very real experiences of far too many men, women, and children. Historically and in movies, rape has often been depicted and perceived as a heroic act. From ancient legends to James Bond. The focus on the power of the rapist, with little to his victim. Everything short of screaming no is just seduction, a game for the more powerful to win. An immoral or wrong person can be brought down a peg by the humiliating act of rape. Society insists that we witness scenes of sexual violence in all forms of media, even media we teach children in school. But it's the theme of rape revenge that is tarred as fetishistic and misogynistic by many. What most rape revenge movies do, that other media before and around them haven't always done, is show the act of rape as an inherently wrong, evil, and traumatizing act. In movies like I Spit on Your Grave and The Corpse of Anna Fritz, even the characters shown as arguably manipulated into contributing to the crimes are still guilty and meet the same fate, no matter how much they try to atone or viewers argue that they didn't really have a choice. They almost exist as a demand that sexual violence is deserving of retribution. But most importantly, what it does is show that rape is not the end. Compare it to A Streetcar Named Desire, where the rape of Blanche is both literally and symbolically the breaking point for her mental.
What did you do that for?
So I could twist the broken end in your face.
Bet you would do that.
I would.
All right, let's have a little rough house. Tiger, drop that bottle top.
Her rape is her end, and it's the end of her story. She had been beaten down throughout the whole play, until there is nothing left for Stanley to do that will humiliate her further. Her arc has finished with her as a broken woman, a tragic decline from which there is no recovery, and she can finally be removed from her sister's life. We see no more of Blanche. She fought a losing battle, with Stanley triumphant.
Whoever you are, I've always depended on the kindness of strangers.
Rape revenge movies, however, are unified in the simple fact that rape is the motivation for the protagonist to revenge, not just something that happens to them. There are many survivors and many women that reject the validity of rape revenge films. Criticism of them tends to falsely assume that rape revenge films are made for male titillation or for traumatizing women. Not only does this not apply to many rape revenge films, it assumes that only men watch rape revenge films and that only men make them. The assumption that only in the age of Me Too have women begun making worthwhile feminist rape revenge movies is both incorrect and ignores the years that women were creating rape revenge media without a public feigning acceptance since Me Too happened. Though in some cases, filmmakers themselves may not call or recognise their own films as rape revenge, often through their own internalised biases against rape revenge movies, as a misogynistic art form, or even through just plain disagreement that rape is the spark for the desire for revenge. Regardless, through a viewer's lens, these are no less rape revenge movies than any others, and what better way to gatekeep and limit the accessibility of these sought-after rape revenge films that are accepted by mainstream feminists than tarring every movie with a brush that says misogynist male fantasy. Rape revenge has existed longer than cinema has, but for many, they are still seen as a misogynistic remnant of sexploitation films. Another criticism that we tend to see levied against rape revenge movies that often ignores the women's impact is that the characters aren't real enough. They act as though there's no real agency for any of the actors that had a hand in making these movies, and end up doubling down on the misogyny that they're critiquing by criticising women for how they look. I always find it entertaining when, in a review, the costuming of a female character is chalked down to just a male fantasy, but everybody involved is a woman. In House of Psychotic Women, an autobiographical examination of female neurosis in horror, Kiela Janice writes about viewing rape revenge films as a young girl as foundational development and learning about rape revenge films as representation of the fear of assault. Reacting to the scenes of sexual violence in movies she consumed at a young age, she would have her Barbies play them out. Barbie didn't even have an immediate response to the incident. She wouldn't cry, wouldn't tell anyone. The story would just end and start again at the beginning. The rape itself was always the fulfillment of the story. I hadn't yet learned how rape can be used effectively as a narrative tool, namely as fuel. Female audiences often complain about the presence of rape scenes in film. These scenes are cited as exploitive and their directors labelled misogynists, but they don't realise that a rape scene is the single greatest justification for anything else in the film that follows. No matter how illogical, unbelievable, sadistic, misanthropic, graphic or torturous, the audience will accept any direction the story takes because, culturally, rape is worse than death. While many manifestations of neurosis are triggered by external factors, rape is especially tragic in that it always results in neurosis. Despite eventual renormalization, no woman ever fully recovers from being raped. Even when a woman is able to emotionally detach herself from the occurrence, that detachment itself is often accompanied by a cynicism that will negatively affect all of her future relationships. The sense of moral assertion and vigilante justice is probably the primary factor that led to my interest in rape revenge films. It's been said a million times that horror films are meant to be cathartic, and that we put ourselves through the terror as a means of symbolically overcoming something we're afraid of. And for a woman, we're taught that nothing is more terrifying than the ever-present threat of rape. So it seems natural to me that I would love rape revenge films. especially when the revenge is particularly sadistic or creative, or when the female protagonist is completely transformed as a consequence. Even more exciting than the revenge is preparing for the revenge. Buying a gun, learning martial arts, setting booby traps, the symbolic cutting of hair, all set to a pounding, anticipatory soundtrack. Anger is a valid stage of grief, and the stages of grief are never linear or separate. Most survivors of trauma do not get presented with a healthy outlet for their anger, and many end up having it negatively affect themselves or their family.
I would ask you to, as part of this sentencing, to grant me 5 minutes in a locked room with this demon.
I have
would
a feeling.
Would you do that?
That is not how
yes
our.
No?
No, sir, I can't.
Would you
do
give me
that.
1 minute?
You know that I can't do that. That's not how our legal system
Well, I'm gonna have
works.
to
Stay down. Press Morgan. I'll
be
get over there, Matthew. Hurry up.
I want that stuff
behind your back.
Give me 1 minute with that. What if this happened to you guys?
I believe that the deliberate act of consuming rape revenge media is a healthy release for that anger that many survivors will ever get to experience, which is why rape revenge is so meaningful, and the genre's accessibility will always be important. For many, having media to relate to is a crucial part of processing their trauma. To accept that revenge will never come, but you're not a sick person for having that fantasy. After my assault, I started spending a huge amount of my time, some days pretty much every moment of free time that I had, in recovery forums. Survivors would share their stories, and we would try to comfort or counsel each other. I shared mine, and I read as many as I could. This wasn't really just positive, it was also a way of digital self-harm. In doing so, I was able to remember that I was abused as a child. But if there was one thing I struggled with, it was the shame of saying what had happened to me, battling with the desire to have my voice heard. If I was in a particularly self-destructive mood, I would seek out the worst of the worst. People talking graphically and openly about what had happened to them and how they felt. It made me feel seen, and it made me afraid. Some of the stories were so similar to my own that when they described how what had happened had shattered their sense of self-esteem, mental health, and ruined their lives, I felt as if maybe I wasn't overreacting when I said I think it ruined mine. I learned that I wasn't the only one who now couldn't sleep if something was touching behind me. I wasn't the only one who had developed a nervous tic. In a world where the people around me and closest to me were telling me that it wasn't that bad and I should have seen it coming, there's a catharsis in reading and writing these stories. A catharsis in knowing that you aren't alone. On these forums, discussions about rape in cinema is common, not only as a way of spreading content warnings to other survivors, and some saying that they hate movies that show sexual violence, but others use it as an "am I alone in liking this?" when it comes to stumbling across a piece of media with extremely triggering content. In my time lurking and posting on survivors forums, there's a continuous thread I noticed. Aside from the usual conversations on whether or not survivors related to rape revenge films or not, there was one pretty consistent TV show that kept popping up as a comfort to survivors. Law & Order SVU is a mainstream series that survivors can access easily, and despite its triggering content, often are able to watch and relate. Unlike most experiences with the police, the main characters in this show are police officers who care about the victims of crime and bringing rapists to justice. In many ways, it's a rape revenge fantasy where the cruel realities of life are made to be more palatable, and survivors often feel empowered and safe watching it. Mariska Hargitay is open about how working on SVU led her to work closely with survivors and rape crisis centres, and how, compared to working on other shows and movies where people would ask her for a signed autograph, SVU fans would approach her, telling her their stories and how her character helped them. But the real world isn't like SVU. Police services around the world consistently fail survivors more than they help them. Many rape revenge movies can be seen as a metaphor for the futility of reporting sexual violence to the police.
My thoughts and those of everyone in the Met Police are with Sarah's loved ones. It's not possible for any of us to begin to imagine what they have been going through. I was able to speak to them earlier today and say again how very sorry I am for their loss and for their pain and their suffering. All of us in the Met are sickened, angered and devastated by this man's crimes. They are dreadful. And everyone in policing feels betrayed.
And survivors with an interest in justice reform have to wrestle with restorative justice and police abolition versus their own experiences. Every good leftist wants prison abolition until either they or someone they know are the victims of crime because they know the system as it exists will fail them. There's a sense of optimism that we know most likely is never going to happen. And it's a natural struggle. How do you balance aspiring for a system where all crime can end in reform with your own personal desire for the person who hurt you to be murdered with a spiked bat? While writing this, my friend pointed me towards a study that was highlighted by Gretchen Falcon-Martin, where it was found that trigger warnings may increase the extent to which people see trauma as central to their identity, which is considered to be counter-therapeutic and can worsen the impact of PTSD in the long run. When I make my own content, I do think it's better to be safe than sorry and let people choose whether or not they want to be hit with something that might be harmful to them. I often wonder about the correlation between deliberately seeking out triggering material, survivors of trauma putting themselves in the harm's way again, and the sense of, it happened to me once, it's just a matter of time until it happens again. Like playing with Barbies, is there a part of us that's just playing out life waiting for the next inevitable trauma to happen? For someone to jump out of the bushes and undo all of that time we spent trying to fix our lives? And if so, what's the point in not doing everything they tell us not to? Why not walk home alone at night? It makes no difference, you think. And does the visual experience of witnessing your greatest fears in the completely safe medium of ethically manufactured film help heal a sense of inevitability? Perhaps make you feel like you have a sense of control over your situation. In seeing violence transform someone throughout a story, you don't feel so alone when you look at yourself and realise that it's changed who you are. In watching a rape revenge protagonist enact swift justice on the people who wronged them, you're put in their shoes, and you're given the axe to wield. But is deliberately seeking out triggering content less about empowerment than it is about self-harm? There are many areas of survivors' forums where this is openly discussed and admitted, and I do admit that's how it started for me, and to an extent still is today. There are so many strange and niche methods of digital self-harm that watching movies barely seems to register until you look back. A lot of the time I was reading those survivors' stories on forums not to listen to their stories and empower them, but to selfishly relive my own trauma and hate myself. And similarly, I've watched these movies deliberately to hurt myself. There have been nights where I haven't been able to sleep, so I've spent all night getting blackout drunk, watching violent movies about empathetic characters being abused. I didn't watch I Spit on Your Grave after my rapist's wife called me a homewrecker, because that I heard it was some secretly feminist empowering masterpiece. I watched it because I wanted to get fucked off my face and scream at my TV. And who's to tell me that that's less valid than a wine mom watching The Notebook for the 15th time because it makes her cry? But there's two things I couldn't help but think about when I was going through the self-destructive binge of media about brutal revenge. The first is, God, I wish that was me. And two, why do I seek out media that I know is triggering while avoiding media that I used to like that accidentally triggers me? The amount of media I lost, for lack of a better word, weighs heavily on me. For a time, I was unaware that my sexual assaults were happening to me every night that I slept there. After everything came to light, I realised that my rapist had been mocking me while I was unaware of what he was doing to me for months. When he would come pick me up in his car to hang out, the Nirvana songs Rape Me and Polly would be playing on the stereo. In the months that I now know he was assaulting me in my sleep, he would sing the lyrics to Polly under his breath and say that it was just a catchy song stuck in his head. I still can't listen to Nirvana without feeling like I'm physically choking. There's an actual response that happens to my body. Like everyone is laughing around me to a joke that I'm too stupid to get. Sometimes I'll be fine and I can handle it and pretend I'm having fun. But other times I'll just have to leave. Especially if a man starts singing one of those songs. However, at the same time, I remember making a deliberate attempt to reclaim another artist. I had introduced my rapist to my favourite band against me. When the album Transgender Dysphoria Blues came out, I had him listen to it with me the day it came out. I made him a fan. We'd gone to concerts together and bought merch together. We sang, we danced, and we cried. One of the nights that I'm certain he assaulted me in my sleep was after sleeping at his house after an Against Me show. It's not just an edgy coincidence that in the aftermath I listened to Against Me on repeat and found new meanings in their songs. The songs about substance abuse hit a lot harder when I realised I was self-medicating with alcohol. The song Ache With Me became more about a sense of passive dissociation and depression and haunting memories. The song Black Me Out is inherently about Laura Jane Grace's desire to be forgotten and start over, tied in with the album's concept of being about a suicidal transgender sex worker. After my abuse, to me the song became the expression of an abused woman screaming for revenge, decrying having ever known the people who wronged her and who she became because of them. To me, that song is a fantasy of rape revenge. And I reclaimed it. Before I went to survivors forums, the first place I actually went was Reddit. I posted on the main women's subreddit and told my whole story. Not out of a sense of wanting to share, but shock and fear. This was the immediate aftermath, the days after. And I quite literally did not know what to do. What I did get was a huge number of women replying and giving me support, telling me that they're so sorry this happened to me and that it was serious. However, before moderators could delete them, I also had to see a number of commenters that were calling me a liar, or saying that I was stupid and asking for it. And these weren't just men. These were women who thought I was stupid and set myself up for it. And that what happened wasn't assault because I let it happen. I didn't break down his front door and go running to the police. I didn't grab a knife and kill him in his parents' house. I went back to the bed. And in other places, even support forums, I got similar responses. Straight women would tell me I wasn't a real lesbian, because no lesbian would be so stupid as to sleep in the same bed as a man that was obviously going to rape you at one point. That I must have been really attracted to him, let him abuse me in my sleep, and just wanted to ruin his family life after the fact like a bad breakup. What did I expect? Eventually the kind replies just became hollow gestures, and the background noise. While the people calling me a dumb slut became the ones that stood out. I reflected on the friends and family that had abused me throughout my life, and I didn't know what it was that made me attract people like this. I began to think, is this just who I am? Do I just radiate victimizable energy? The more I got sexually harassed and sexually assaulted just confirmed this to me further. I ended up putting myself in dangerous situations just to try to prove myself wrong. After my assault, I kept being told that, yeah, I should assume that any and every man is looking to rape or kill me. That insistent feeling of it will happen again is always present. At one point, a drunk girl in a really dingy little metal pub offered me a palm reading out of nowhere. And I was like, yeah, sure, this'll be fun. And through what actually seems like just drunk lack of tact and no intentional malice, she grabbed my hand, took one look at my palm, and asked me if I had been raped. Because my love line was broken, and so was I. This alone ended up giving me like a month-long existential crisis. And in a way, in hindsight, it sort of helped. Because I don't radiate victimizable energy. I'm not an idiot for trusting someone. If people look at me and know that something happened to me, it's not because I'm a coward. It's because I made it through that. And movies like this show me that that's possible. There was a knife in the room when my assault happened, and I never picked it up. I've wrestled with that guilt for a long time. I blamed my brain's protective instincts on a choice I made that I didn't really have. I wasn't able to be the living embodiment of the characters I've since sought comfort in. And if it happens again, I probably won't be then. For survivors of sexual violence, there is no dramatic finale where we will wreak havoc and dole out retribution on those who wronged us. But rape revenge at the end of the day, when you strip away the literal bloody violence often used, is a metaphor for rape recovery. And that recovery is ongoing, and for many a lifelong experience. But they show that rape is not the end that it feels like.